Speaking of is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for supporting Milwaukee PBS.
I usually work in the basement of our TOSA tri-level, kind of a mid-century vibe. I'm going to go up 3 flights of very short steps to see what my kids are doing in the middle of their homeschool day before some of the classes that take them downtown. Hey, Kate.
Hey.
Where are the kids?
Upstairs in the classroom.
All right, here we go. Another flight of steps. Check in and see what they're up to. Hola, niños.
Hola.
What are you up to?
We're reading
What are you reading?
Harry Potter,
Which one?
the 6 Half-Blood Prince.
How do you like it?
I love it.
Nita, what are you up to?
I'm reading
What are you reading?
Dogman
In Spanish or in English?
in Spanish.
What's it called?
It's called Hombre Perro.
That's the typical sound of homeschooling and working from home, only most days I'm in the basement. My name is Mariano Avila, and you're listening to Speaking Of, a podcast by Milwaukee PBS. Today, I'll bring you 2 stories about different ways of being at home in Milwaukee as newcomers. The first, you guessed it, is personal because it's my own family's journey with homeschooling. The second is the fascinating journey of Maryam Durani, a special guest from Afghanistan that the U.S. State Department settled here in Milwaukee. With me in the studio are my 2 co-hosts, Lexi Mack and Scotty Myers. Hey, guys.
Hey, hey.
Hey, Mariano.
Before we get started, I wondered, Lexi, if you could give us a recap of the story you did on your podcast about kombucha. I think it was episode 4 of Speaking Of, this podcast here. For those of you who haven't heard it, specifically what I'm wondering about is what you found out about the Great Resignation.
Yeah, so I had spoken to an expert, and what he told me was that, the Great Resignation obviously is just a fancy phrase of saying that we're seeing unprecedented numbers of people quitting their jobs since COVID has struck. And a lot of reasons have contributed to this, being whether burnout, safety concerns with COVID as far as exposure, if you're coming in contact with it and you're afraid of bringing it home to your family. A lot of people were considering wages, like, is my wage worth the amount of labor I'm putting in? And when I asked him about demographics, he said that a number of women had actually contributed to the Great Resignation, that particularly mothers.
Scotty, I know you've started to do some reporting on 1036 about education. 2 years into this pandemic, what are you finding out from school teachers who've stuck with their profession?
There is some real interesting statistics here, some alarming statistics. We know that since January of 2020, there have been more than 500,000 teachers who have left the profession. So the number I recently saw was 600,000. And we know that students studying teaching is down 35% across the country. And here in Wisconsin, there are some programs that are seeing even steeper declines. So those are some concerning numbers.
And I just wanted to add something because I forgot to mention it and Scotty sparked my memory. But my expert also said that when speaking of women and the Great Resignation, that women are actually leaving the workforce entirely in great numbers, that they're not just quitting jobs and transferring, but they're actually leaving the workforce entirely.
As you both know, Kate, my wife, is part of the Great Resignation. We've talked about this on the podcast before. She was a career high school teacher with 15 years of experience at a parochial school. She was at the top of her pay scale in a leadership position, working 5 minutes from our house, and COVID turned our world upside down. She's also part of the uptick in homeschooling. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the number of families now homeschooling has doubled since the pandemic.
Wow.
Yep. It's been growing at a rate of about 3.3% since 1999, but in 2020, it shot up from 5.4% of households educating at home to 11.1%, again doubling. You'll recall from my first episode that the Pew Research Center found that a lot of the isolation that happened in the spring of 2020 reversed itself a year later. Drawing parallels here, at the peak, 6.8 million additional households started homeschooling, but by Christmas it was down to about 5 million. Of course, my family, like I said, is part of those trends as well. This is the part where I'd usually describe whoever I'm interviewing and where we talked. And while I think I can tell you that I interviewed my wife, Kate, in our basement where I have my home office, it seems odd to be the one that describes her. And since neither of you have met her, we recorded a short hello video. Maybe you guys can tell our listeners what Kate looks like, because it just seems weird for me to do it.
No.
Aww.
Love
Here
it.
she is in all her homeschool glory.
I love her bangs.
Hey, Lexi. Hey, Scotty. I'm Kate. Nice to meet you. I've enjoyed listening to your episodes on the podcast, and congratulations on your work.
Okay, I need to tell listeners that Kate has like the biggest, brightest smile I have ever seen that goes from like ear to ear. It is radiant, really big. Like that's the first thing you notice when you see Kate.
Right. The way she just said our names just made me feel like I knew her already.
Well, she certainly hears me talk about you, and she has been listening to our podcast. With that, though, here's our conversation in our basement.
I used to teach high school Spanish. Before that, I taught a few other ages. And now I stay home and homeschool my kids.
We have an 8-year-old girl in 3rd grade and a 5-year-old boy in kindergarten. Both went to private schools before the pandemic. That's part of her contract. We didn't really have a choice.
So they went to school where she taught, and that was sort of dictated to you.
Yeah.
Got it.
So Kate has a history of asthma. That's why those early pandemic days, the risk without the vaccine seemed too high to us. So she resigned, and we pulled our kids out too. And beyond the pandemic, and to tie in some of what Lexi and Scotty, you guys were reporting on in the Great Resignation, it's not just COVID that has been pushing teachers out.
I think a lot of teachers would agree with me that teaching has gotten more and more demanding. And in the last few years, it just seems like there's hardly enough time in the day to go use the bathroom or get any grading or planning so that on the weekend you can focus on your family. I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning to make lesson plans and Zoom plans. And I thought, I can't give this much of myself anymore. I was giving the best of myself to my students at school, and my kids were kind of getting the leftovers.
That's powerful, man.
Yeah.
We both felt that way. It was a lot to go through and just talk through like, oh, what are we actually giving our kids versus our employers?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people went through that whole
Absolutely.
thing.
I tried to extend learning beyond a school day. You know, we might work on reading and writing and math during certain times during the day, but our whole lives are dedicated to learning and going places and exploring new things, asking questions about current events and art, music. So really, I think that being a mom and a homeschool mom, they bleed together a lot. Although I think sometimes the mom needs a little bit of a break. Just like a little bit of alone time.
So shout out to Kate, because it certainly is hard on her at times. And when it's a bit much, she goes on walks alone or to hang out with other homeschool moms or goes shopping or to a salon, whatever, so long as it's on her own. And of course, Kate's an adult, so she can express what she needs. But kids aren't as articulate about broader needs. They'll tell you that they're hungry or that they need to pee a million times, but ask them why they're crabby and sad or not motivated, and they struggle with it, which makes us as parents worried about their social life and their personal development, especially for our 5-year-old who is in kindergarten this year, but before was 2 years into preschool.
He doesn't always feel like he's part of a group. It takes him a while to warm up to people. He'll talk to anyone, but he doesn't really feel bonded to them.
Now both our kids are in group settings at least 3 times, maybe 4 times per week. And we're watching it closely. On the upside, our kindergartner is doing 3rd grade math and reading as well. And our daughter understands literary narrative better than I did as an undergrad. So,
Hey, Mariano, can I ask?
Yeah.
You said that you're making sure that they're getting these like group type settings at least, 3-4 times a week. Like, what does that look like for you guys?
Well, there's a bunch of different groups. So, for example, we have one of the Hispanic academies on the South Side has folkloric Mexican dance lessons.
Awesome.
Capoeira. I think that's tomorrow night. And then they have capoeira, which is Brazilian self-defense /dance, which is really cool. So they do that. They also have this place up in Saukville called River Edge. And they do like nature walks, and they teach them about, like, they just did maple syrup.
Awesome.
So they go, they tap the trees and boil the thing.
Very cool.
And, like, it's really cool stuff like that. Yeah, we spend a lot of time and energy, mostly Kate, finding out where other homeschool kids are attending. And I didn't think I was going to talk about this, but the homeschool movement really started kind of as a response to prayer not being part of school anymore and desegregation. And so a lot of the people that originally really got into homeschooling were very conservative white Christians. Today, it's kind of a little bit more of a mixed bag, but that's still the majority. And for us, there's some values that we share with that crowd. There's some values that we don't share with that crowd. And so finding folks that were kind of where we were, that's been fun, moving to a new city.
That just reminded me of a doctoral candidate at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee who actually, I think part of her homeschooling journey has been eye-opening for me because she studies like African-American studies, but she was very frustrated with how her son was being treated and taught in public schools. And so that is what caused her to pull her son out. She's getting her doctorate in education, I believe. But her and some other, I don't know if they're her friends or just like other parents that were dealing with the same struggles, they started kind of the pods. I can't think of the name of it right now, but where they give them homeschooling in groups to get more of that social interaction. But the curriculum is very like Black history based and just teaching the kids to be proud of their Black identity and pushing against what they thought was a racist curriculum that didn't serve Black students.
Yeah.
It's funny that you would mention that. I didn't know how to fit it in, but since you just brought it up, it's perfect. African Americans left traditional schooling for homeschooling at 5 times the rate of everybody else.
Is it for some of those reasons that Lexi just outlined?
The why is not, this is census data, so I don't know.
Yeah. And well, you said at the House piece, the general population, it doubled, right?
Doubled. Yeah.
Yeah, that's significant.
Yeah, I would imagine like in the era that we're in with like Black Lives Matter and just children being made cognizant of racial tensions earlier in their childhood, that has an impact on how you can learn. So if you're in a classroom and you feel like your teacher is picking on you or not seeing you, or that your lesson plan doesn't reflect your identity or is only celebrating parts of your identity, I can imagine that for parents, that's a struggle. Like, how do I get my child the best representation in their curriculum and that they feel safe and seen by their teachers? Which is probably the parallel to make with why homeschooling was sort of originated with white conservatives who felt like I didn't see a reflection of our own beliefs of religious-based curriculum, and that's why we're fleeting,
I let my kids ask any questions that they want about the world so that they can understand what's going on. And one thing I always say to my daughter is, you can ask me anything and I'll tell you the truth. And there are things where I give her a very short answer, but I always give her the truth. And so when she asks about what's going on in the world, I do my best to just tell her in an age-appropriate way what's happening.
But Kate is an educator with 15 years of K through college experience, and I'm home a fair bit, too. I think we have a membership to every museum, like I said, in Milwaukee and in Chicago, the Schloss Audubon Center, River Edge up in Saukville, and they have either music or dance or ecology classes with several other kids several times per week. And I really do wonder how single parents or parents who both have to work at least part-time or are on much tighter budgets do homeschooling. It's not easy. Or whether they would want to do homeschooling and just can't.
Absolutely. I think that's a big factor is thinking of your economic standing, of like who can afford to. Prior to COVID, working from home wasn't a really common thing. So a lot of it you just assume is like, okay, this parent doesn't work full time. And for, like you said, single parents or parents that just don't have the means for one parent to stay home, that can be a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I found teaching my kids at home or doing home education was that while it was a pandemic choice, it was really magical. And I loved doing it. I saw my kids growing. I grew closer with them. They grew closer with each other. And then the second year that we chose to do it was maybe only 25% a pandemic choice.
So what's the future for you and your family in terms of homeschooling?
I think we are considering putting them back in school. We would like Montessori. We think it's a good transition back into structured schedule, which they haven't had in 2 years.
And what about Kate? Is she planning on going back to teaching once they're in school, or does she still want to be a stay-at-home mother?
She's not sure she wants to go back.
Yeah.
And for someone that has a master's degree and 15 years of experience in one field, saying, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, what do you do next?
So on our last episode of 1036, we did a story about this. There's a teacher from Ohio, and she made a post that went viral. The teacher is named Julie Ryan Holderbaum, and she wrote a series of 117 questions. I'll just read a couple of them because this is really incredible. She says, is Michael acting off today? Is he tired or just depressed? Should I pull him out into the hall and ask him if he's okay? Or would it be worse to draw attention to him? Will I be accused of teaching divisive concepts if I lead a discussion about why we are not going to say the N-word out loud when we read Of Mice and Men? Will the kids go home and tell their parents what we talked about? Do kids still do that? Do parents still ask? Is this book worth the battle it might lead to? Or should I just teach Fahrenheit 451 instead? Wouldn't that be ironic? I mean, it's really revealing.
Yep. I would say this is personal. I don't think teachers are nearly appreciated enough.
Preach.
Yeah.
Preached on that.
Well, thanks for indulging a personal story. It's tricky as a journalist, but I thought this was one area that, made sense. But now I want to turn to our second story about being at home and being cut off. It turns out Milwaukee is now home to about 400 refugees from Afghanistan that the U.S. State Department resettled with help from nonprofits like Hanan Refugee Relief Center, where I interviewed two women. The first is Sheila Badwan, who is vice president of Hanan at the national level, but works right here in Milwaukee. She's energetic and attentive, but always seems to be running like 10 tabs on her mental browser, She's helping dozens of families meet their needs like filling out a job application or learning English, paying bills, getting medical help. I really don't know how she and an all-volunteer team do all the stuff that they do.
I've known Sheila for a little bit over the years.
Well, I met her because of you.
We cannot sing her praises enough.
These families are actually coming off the bases in a big amount. We've helped close to 250 people so far from Afghanistan, and they came pretty quickly.
Many of the Afghan folks resettled here in the U.S. are U.S. allies, folks who were translators for troops or employed on behalf of the U.S. or really high-profile individuals. In fact, some of their visas are not regular refugee visas at all. They're, quote, special immigrant visas. Frankly, I didn't even know those existed until recently. And on that note, I want to introduce you to the second woman I talked to at Hanan, Maryam Durani. She has an inquisitive gaze and a calming demeanor. She dresses conservatively with beautifully embroidered hijabs covering her hair, which I find nice and challenging for American assumptions about hijabs. These are the scarves that Muslim women wear. Because Maryam's work on women's rights has been honored around the world, literally.
I am focused for the girls and women because the women stay in Afghanistan and women come from the other country. They are refugees. They are needed more help in the community because the Taliban start or born for this city. And the pupil about the woman is not good. They have a bad idea about the woman.
Like what?
They are thinking women more time need to stay in the home. Don't need you go outside the home or find the work on other things.
Even though the Taliban's home base was Kandahar, where she lived, she was publicly supporting women's initiatives and was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people for her work. She also received the Courageous Women Award from the U.S. State Department from then First Lady Michelle Obama.
I have a big organization. This organization have like 5 or 6 parts. One part is the organization is radio station. This radio station name is Women. In my language, in Pashto language is Merman. And this radio station more focus about the women rights and advocacy for women. After 15 years, more men is coming and say to me, I want my daughter same like you. I taking me like role model this time in my city.
And that's no small thing to have people change their cultural paradigm based on your work. Unfortunately, not everybody embraced Durani's work, and she survived 2 assassination attempts.
Oh my God.
I lost my best friend, not just one. It's more my best friend, Khalid, in the city, my city. They are women or men. But every time I'm just thinking about it's no important. You go and continue your way because I want my country have a peace for new generation.
Of course, as we know, the Taliban took over the country when the U.S. pulled out last August, which put everyone who had helped the U.S. or advocated for rights that the Taliban didn't believe in at risk of imprisonment or torture or death. So she moves from Kandahar, Taliban Central, to the capital city of Kabul, where she tries 5 times to go to the airport and leave, but the Taliban blocks the road or waits there too long for her and her elderly dad with limited mobility.
Wow.
But she talks to friends in D.C. and Virginia who pull some strings, and she gets a call.
You can come to airport. I said, yes, I'm go to airport. After 3 hours or 4 hours, they are calling my name and my family, and very warm, and oxygen is very low, and child is crying.
They arrived at about 10, and at 6 a.m., 450 people get put on a military plane and are flown to Qatar. But Qatar won't let them land, so their 4-hour flight gets delayed 3 more hours.
And don't have any facility, just water.
It was so hot in this military plane that her sister-in-law and 2 others, including a child, all fall unconscious.
Wow.
At which point they're granted permission to land and are put on a hot hangar. This is Qatar again. This is like middle of the desert, with over 1,000 other people. Maryam spends the next 4 days there, terrified that her dad will die of exhaustion. But her dad, her sister-in-law, all of them finally make it to the U.S., where they're sent to Fort McCoy in western Wisconsin and spend about a month, and then are resettled to Milwaukee by the State Department.
And I'm searching about the Milwaukee city. The first time I'm worried. But I find more people from the Milwaukee. I'm asking about the Milwaukee city. They are said, hey, it's okay, no worry. I'm staying in Milwaukee, and Milwaukee city is a good area. And more information they are to give me. Now I'm thinking it's good place for me and my family start life. I'm taking this city like my home now. I'm feeling like this. And I want more enjoy with this city, community, and society. And I want stay a good person, a full person for this city and society.
I'm sure it's not surprising that Maryam isn't waiting around to contribute to the city and the society.
She's actually been helping us with translation, and she's been meeting families. She wants to work with her people. This is amazing to see someone here that just came here and what she went through and really wanting to help.
What do you want folks to know in Milwaukee about our Afghan neighbors coming in?
There are people that want to live in freedom, that want to send their kids to school and want to work. You know, they're just ordinary people.
What was interesting to me of what Sheila pointed out was just, Mariano, all your stories have been about home in some way. And she pointed out that these refugees, they want to live in freedom, send their kids to school and to work. They just want to be safe and secure. And I think that is what home consists of. And so for Maryam, even though she's thousands of miles away from her home, she's trying to make a new home here, still fighting for people's rights or making it easier for others around her. So I think her story for me just shows like home. It's cliche, but like home is where the heart is. Home is where your passion is. And I think she's chosen to make Milwaukee her home through helping other refugee families or people who are in similar situations as her.
Did I mention that she's descendant of the first king of Afghanistan?
No, oh, wow.
Yeah, like direct descendant.
Mic drop.
Right. She's no small thing, and it's, it really is amazing to have her. But that kind of wraps up this episode, and that also wraps up my 3-part series on home and season 1 of Speaking Of. How does it feel?
We went through a lot. I mean, I just think of like Lexi's 3 episodes, mine 3 episodes, Mariano, you're wrapping up your 3rd episode here. This is quite a bit. We went on a journey. I learned stuff. I hope our listeners learned a little something along the way. I mean, you two taught me quite a bit, whether it was about our sense of home and belonging, some incredible new people, sort of just like stats and data today about homeschooling. I had no idea. The Great Recession that Lexi walked us through, even some of the reverse migration stuff that Lexi added to that, I thought was just super interesting.
Yeah, I learned a lot about kombucha in Brookfield.
And that it doesn't smell like feet.
We're going to leave that one alone. But no, I want to say that something I appreciated as someone who is not from here was feeling like I have an on-ramp in each of you for different parts of Milwaukee and different communities and different ways of viewing the city. I think Brookfield, we put an offer on a house in Brookfield, again, kind of not knowing what that meant or who was there, or it was just such a tight market when we moved here that was a house that met our needs and our budget. someone beat us, and we didn't end up moving there. We moved to Wauwatosa, but it was interesting to find out what that community is and what it's struggling with and kind of what its makeup is. Lexi, hearing stories of entrepreneurs here and different parts of Milwaukee proper and how people are trying to revitalize Bronzeville and just the efforts of turning this into people's vision of what the city can be, not just kind of, oh, woe is me, this is the city that I was given. I think that, which is a common thread, I think, in one way or another of all of our podcasts, that has been, Lexi, something I've really appreciated is just the resilience of Black Milwaukeeans and Black entrepreneurs here. It's just, I feel like I know the city a lot better after, 9 episodes?
That's great.
And I feel like it's somewhere that I can start to call home.
Well, that's good. That's what we want. Yes, we made progress. And I think for me, something that I really appreciate about our conversations every week is that we all bring different sectors of the city. Like you said, Mariano, like we've touched on very different people and very different neighborhoods and just areas. And with you all's episodes, sometimes it's easy to get real quiet because you're just listening. You're like, I really just want to hear everything that this subject is saying and where they're coming from. I think especially with yours, Mariano, hearing from Maryam and her experience coming to Milwaukee, or even just hearing from Ron, whose family has indigenous roots here for thousands of years. I think this podcast gave us an opportunity to just really hear from people that we typically don't get to hear from in our day-to-day storytelling.
And it was just nice to kind of open up and be personal a little bit. I think, Lexi, we all know the fact that you're pregnant and you just bought a house. Mariano, we know we met your wife and we sort of met my hometown. So it was just interesting that our own personal experiences with our stories, I think, helped bring some insight.
Well, there would be probably a few more episodes between seasons. Lexi, you may not be around for all of them, which,
Well,
sad
I'm
for
not
all
falling off. Oh, my goodness.
Well, we're not going to force you to be here is what I'm saying. Like, we can't.
Well, don't get the listeners scared. I'll be back. I just have a little human I need to tend to for a bit.
Well, in the meantime, I want to leave you with a bit from my conversation with Maryam, speaking to people at her new home, but speaking to folks in Milwaukee. And yeah, for all of you who've stuck with us through 9 episodes, well, in our mini episode, so 10 technically. Thank you very much. My name is Mariano Avila. You're listening to Speaking Of. And with me are co-hosts.
I'm Scotty Lee Myers.
I'm Alexandria Mack.
So here's Maryam. Thank you very much for listening.
Please feel the Afghan refugees feeling because they have a hard time now. They are losing everything. They don't have anything about the past. And I think that these people just want peace.